next edition of the Holland Land Office Museum's Artifact Video Series. My name is Ryan Duffy and I'm the director of the museum. In this week's topic, we're going to discuss one of the few occupants of the Holland Land Office building other than the Holland Land Company, and that is Mrs. Bryant Seminary. Now, the story of Mrs. Bryant Seminary begins in 1852 when Ruth Beardsley Bryan moves into the recently vacated Ellicott Mansion across the street from the Holland Land Office building on Main Street. This happened after the death of David Ellicott Evans, who was the nephew of Joseph Ellicott, and she decides that she would like to open up a school for girls, and it becomes known as Mrs. Bryant Seminary. And it was essentially a finishing school where girls of roughly high school age, perhaps a little younger, perhaps a little older, would learn the skills needed to be a modern woman in mid-18th century America. Now, many of the skills that were taught would be very archaic by today's standards, but this was actually one of a premier school in the United States, and girls from around the country, particularly the Midwest, were sent by their parents to this school in order to become young ladies. Now, the campus of the seminary was not just the Ellicott Mansion. That is where the girls stayed and was essentially their dormitory, but there was another building that they would actually learn in, and that would be the land office building that we are housed in. This was actually their school building, essentially, and it was particularly useful for their music classes, which was a big part of the curriculum, as the thick stone walls were perfect at blocking out the outside noise of busy Main Street right outside. At the height of its popularity, there would have about 40 students at a time attending the school. Tuition would cost about $150 for 3 months, which was equivalent to over $4,000 today, so this was only for the wealthy families of America. And that would cover your room and board, essentially, in tuition, but additional fees were needed for books, sheet music, and any other spending money that was needed. The curriculum was actually quite diverse for the time. It included music, French, German, embroidery, various art projects, as well as other social skills that a young lady would need at the time. Mrs. Bryan would also lend out money to the girls so that they could go about town and get whatever provisions they need, but to also attract the eyes of the local men who might make them very happy wives in the future. The goal of this school is to make these young ladies into women that would be very good housewives in the end. But that's not to say it didn't have its alumni go on to do great things after leaving Batavia here. One of those was Theodosia Burr Shepherd, who became an accomplished botanist and actually became known as the Flower Queen of California, as she went on to create a lot of hybrid species of flowers and was one of the first to really expand in that field. And we're talking in the latter half of the 19th century that she's accomplishing that. Another prominent member of the school was Mary Patty Stocking, who was actually a teacher at the school. Now, she might not be famous on her own, but she was actually married to someone rather important to Batavia and to Buffalo. She was married to a man named John Milburn, who was a lawyer who grew up in Batavia but actually moved on to great success in Buffalo and was the president of the Pan American Exposition. And it was in the Milburn home that President McKinley actually died after he was shot at the Pan American Exposition. Mrs. Bryan actually retires from the school in 1879 and is taken over by two of her former students, the Sneed sisters, who were from Pavilion. And they run it for the next couple of years. However, they are soon approached by outside forces, mostly from the Midwest, who are looking to take advantage of the school and looking to move it. They received a lot of proposals from Midwestern cities about moving their finishing school to those areas, as a lot of their students are actually coming from the Midwest, and out in those areas there wasn't a school like the seminary, so they were looking to move it a lot closer to home. And one of those cities that came to Batavia to twist their ear on that was Toledo, Ohio. And after some deliberation, the school actually moves to Toledo shortly after 1880 and became the Sneed School for Girls in Toledo. And after some time, it would change buildings and eventually change names. You can actually see Mrs. Bryant Seminary today, as it still exists, it's just known as the Maumee Valley Day School in Toledo, which is a private school, but is no longer just for girls. It's co-ed, and it has a more modern curriculum, obviously, but its impact is still existing today, so we can actually trace Mrs. Bryant Seminary, Batavia, New York, all the way to the modern day, even though it began 170 years ago. Now, I have a very special artifact that I'd like to share that relates to the school that I think will give us a very first-hand account of what life was like at the school, or at least what they were working on while they were here, as we have an abstract book that was basically the workbook of a student called F. Pocahontas Reeves, and she was here from 1864 to 1867. Now, F. Pocahontas Reeves, Frances was actually her first name, as you can see, here's the title page. And it begins on September 22nd, 1864, so she was actually here during the Civil War. And she has several abstracts about famous people of the day, and different poems, and writing assignments. And if you'll look, the handwriting is just impeccable. The cursive is just out of this world. This was something that was taught very heavily at the time, as every young lady and young man need to learn how to write, as well. This is before our electronic devices, so and it wasn't just what we call scholastic work, but you also had recipes. Last entry here is from March 23rd, 1867, and she probably left the school not long after that, as the program usually would last about as long as we would think a high school would last. Hope you enjoyed this edition of our Artifact video series. And if you happen to have missed any in the past, feel free to go to our YouTube channel, Holland Land Office Museum, and you can see all of them there. And stay tuned for more as we go on through to other topics.